Hello, so this is I'm making this video primarily just to help you guys with figuring out how to translate the passive voice sentences into English. I know that you now all know what a passive voice sentence in English looks like, as well as what a passive voice sentence in Latin looks like. So the thing to remember, of course, is that the way you figure out whether or not it is passive or active is, does it have this TUR or NTUR ending? And if it does, that means that it is a passive voice sentence. Whereas if it doesn't, if this were to just be pulsat, then it would be an active voice sentence. Although this particular sentence might not make much sense in active. But anyway, the point is that you guys both know what an active voice sentence is in English and in Latin. Nevertheless, it's a good idea to get practice specifically with turning a passive voice sentence in Latin into English, because a lot of the time, a lot of my students will have pitfalls with figuring out how to exactly to translate one into the other. So remember what a passive voice sentence sounds like. Instead of John read the book, a passive voice sentence would be, the book is read by John. So it's a little bit wordier when you're going one from the other. However, they more or less communicate the same thing happening, namely a book is read by a man named John. John is the one who's reading the book in both sentences, and the book is the thing that is being read. Similarly, reading is the thing that is being done. So an active voice sentence and a passive voice sentence usually communicate the same thing if you're flipping them one from the other. So what does that mean? Well, you'll remember back in chapter 3 that one of the first sentences that taught you how verbs work, how the accusative works, and things like that was Marcus Iuliam pulsat. If you flip that around into a passive voice sentence, it becomes Iulia a Marco pulsator. So you'll see that instead there's no accusative word in the entire sentence, whereas there needs to be an accusative word in the first sentence in Marcus Iuliam pulsat. Iuliam would be the object, and therefore she has to be in the accusative. However, in this sentence, Iulia is the subject, so she is in the nominative case. Marcus is not in the accusative case because he needs to be in the ablative case, because in order to signify that he is the one doing the punching in a passive sentence, you need this word here, a or ab, either one, but usually it will be a. Marco, and Marco is in the ablative case. So if you go back to your chart, you'll see that the ablative case endings are the o, and o for the masculine, feminine, and neuter respectively. But then in the plural, that's all for the singular. In the plural, it becomes is for all three genders. So if, I don't know, if we were having multiple Marcuses, I'm not exactly sure what that would mean, but let's say we had multiple Marcuses who are all punching Julia, we would change it from Marco to Marquis. So Julia a Marquis pulsator. Julia is being punched by Marcuses. As actually kind of funny that sounds. But anyway, how do you turn this into English? Well, so you still put the nominative case word the same way you would in an active sentence. So Julia, but then instead of just doing the regular verb next, you would instead say, so what is the meaning of this word? Pulsa means punch, and pulsator is being punched. So instead of just saying punches, you would say Julia is punched or is being punched. Remember, make sure that it remains an is and does not become a was being punched or was punched, because that could just simply be then you're making it a past tense word. You're turning it from something that's happening here and now to something that already happened, and that's not really what's being meant by the passive voice. And then you translate this a or ab here with the word by, and the word Marcus with, of course, or the word Marco becomes Marcus. So Julia, so a Julia a Marco pulsator means Julia is being punched by Marcus. So let's add some more stuff to the sentence, just to make it more and more complex, so that way you guys will know how to translate each of the individual types of words. Julia et, or each of the individual types of sentences, sorry. Julia et Quintus a Marco pulsantur. So you'll see that the ending for the verb has changed. Why is it changed? Well, it's changed because of the fact that we now have two subjects. We have Julia and Quintus. Notice how they're both in the singular, but together, because they're two instead of one, becomes plural. Notice how it does not become plural or singular based off of how many people are actually doing the punching. It's based entirely off of how many people are being punched. So how would we translate this? Well, we would still translate it more or less in the same way as up here, but instead of just writing Julia, we would also write let's get that out of bold. We would write Julia and Quintus. So Julia and Quintus, and then the rest of the sentence goes more or less the same, but we have to remember that now that this is plural, we have to make it plural. So instead of is being punched, we have to write are being punched. So Julia and Quintus are being punched by Marcus. There. That wasn't that much more difficult. All you needed to really do is add an extra word and turn the verb into a plural. So now let's go to the third sentence. Julia non leta, quia a Marco pulsator. This is slightly more complex. Instead of just having sort of the basic passive sentence, now we have a comma, the dreaded comma, I know, and we have an explanatory word, quia, which means because. So instead of the normal, we would say Julia non leta, which means Julia is not happy. I should probably put the word est in here, est non leta or non est leta, because est means is, and that would probably make it easier for you guys. So Julia est non leta. Julia is not happy. Why is she not happy? Because she is being, remember, keep it present, punched by Marcus. So this sentence isn't really that much more complex. You just have to remember that you also need to translate this in addition to translating all this. And notice how, despite the fact that there's a comma and an explanatory word in the middle, Julia is still the one that the verb is about. So the pulsator refers back to Julia. All right, so now we get to the last word. Julia, quae a Marco pulsator, plorat et in hortum it. So again, Julia, let's just write that down already at the very beginning. Julia, we know that she is our subject. But then we get, this is a complex sentence because we have a sentence within this sentence that relies on the outer sentence. What does that mean? Well, maybe I'll explain that in a further chapter. For now, just know that this is what's called a relative clause because it's introduced by one of these words, qui, quae, or quod. In this case, quae, because Julia is feminine, so quae has to be feminine. Julia, and then quae means who. So Julia, who a Marco pulsator, oh, well, that's the easy part. It's the same way that we translated the previous ones, is being punched. Is being punched by Marcus. So Julia, who is being punched by Marcus, florat et in hortum it. That part's rather simple. It's just simply the active form of the word. Let me write that out for you. So plorat in et in hortum it means Julia, who is being punched by Marcus, cries and goes into the garden. So that should be everything. I hope you guys do a good job with the passive voice.